9 months from now, 100 years ago, the horror of all ages came together to open the curtain on mankind's greatest century of violence, the 20th century. What distinguished the First World War from all wars before it was the massive power of the antagonists. Modern weaponry, mass conscription, and indefatigable valour produced a cauldron of destruction, the likes of which the world had never seen. The generals, especially the Allied ones, knew through military training that not since the Napoleonic Wars had frontal attacks been effective, certainly not against the foil of barbed wire fortified by the modern machine gun. Yet a line of trenches was dug from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps, a front which denied commanders the opportunity of that classic military manoeuvre, the turning flank and encirclement. And into this deadly crevice they fed their heroic, young, obedient populations. The First World War was a war devoid of any virtue. It arose from the quagmire of European tribalism, a complex interplay of nation-state destinies overlaid by notions of cultural superiority peppered with racism. The First World War not only destroyed European civilization and the empires at its heart, its aftermath led to a second conflagration, the Second World War, which divided the continent until the end of the century. A century beyond Armageddon, young men and women are now freed from that kind of tyranny. The virulent European disease of cultural nationalism and ethnic atavism not only destroyed Europe, it destroyed the equilibrium of the world. By 1915, we had no need to reaffirm our European heritage at the price of being dragged to a European Holocaust. We had escaped that mire, both sociologically and geographically, but out of loyalty to Imperial Britain, we returned to Europe's killing fields to decide the status of Germany, a question which should earlier have been settled by foresight and by statecraft. Those bloody battles in Flanders, on the Western Front and at Gallipoli nevertheless distinguished us, demonstrating what we were made of. Our embrace of a new sense of human values and relationships through these events gave substance to what we now call the Anzac tradition. For whatever claims Britain and its empire had on those who served and died on the Western Front and at Gallipoli, the primary claim remained Australia's. Those Australians fought and died not in defence of some old world notion of competing empires and territorial conquests, but for the new world, the one they belonged to and hoped to return to. This is why Australia was never in need of any redemption at Gallipoli, any more than it was in need of one at Kokoda 30 years later. There was nothing missing in our young nation or our idea of it that required the martial baptism of a European cataclysm to legitimise us. What the Anzac legend did do, by the bravery and sacrifice of our troops, was reinforce our own cultural notions of independence, mateship and ingenuity, of resilience and courage in adversity. The unknown Australian soldier interred in this memorial reminds us of these lessons, as much as he reminds us of the more than 100,000 Australians lost to us by war. By his interment, I thought it important to say that this unknown Australian soldier would serve his country yet again, that his presence would give us a deeper understanding of what it means to be Australian, as well as serving to remind us of the sacrifice of the more than 100,000 men and women who never came home. The soul of a nation is richer for it having been warmed by its stories and traditions. Yet its storage and tradition should not stifle or constrain its growth as it needs to adapt. I'm greatly heartened that so many young Australians find a sense of identity and purpose from the Anzac legend and from those Australian men and women who have fought in wars over the last 100 years. But the true commemoration of their lives, service and sacrifice is to understand that the essence of their motivation was their belief in all we had created here and our responsibility in continuing to improve it. Homage to these people has to be homage to them and about them, and not to some idealised or jingoist reduction of what their lives really meant. One thing is certain: young Australians, like the young Europeans I mentioned earlier, can no longer be dragooned en masse into military enterprises of the former imperial variety on the whim of so-called statesmen. They are fortunately too wise to the world to be cannon fodder of the kind their young forebears became, young innocents who had little or no choice. Commemorating these events should make us even more wary of grand ambitions and grand alliances of the kind that fractured Europe and darkened the 20th century. In the long shadow of these upheavals, we gather to ponder their meaning and to commemorate the values that shone in their wake: courage under pressure, ingenuity in adversity, bonds of mateship, and above all, loyalty to Australia.